Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Professional Pillow Talk. You're going to love this one. Really. It's one of my favorite episodes with one of my favorite people. Despite the slight sound difficulties, we explore a really relevant topic, which is being multifaceted in a world that's hyper specialized, or at least forces and dictates hyper specialization as a form of success. Zinhle, a multi-potentialite Av note, shares her experiences and gives some advice and really just allows us to explore the idea that the world isn't as linear as we think it is. Please do tune in. And if you're really liking this content, please go ahead and like and follow. And like some of my followers, go ahead and maybe share this episode with someone that would resonate. But for now, let's get into the episode.
So, in our personal lives, we are encouraged to be multi potentialites, yet when we get to work, then it's a different story. But why do we have to wait until we build a Microsoft if we genuinely want to live life where we go, okay, actually, I'm interested in philanthropy and I want to do R&D and solve for malaria? So for me, the world has some level of hypocrisy with that.
They say is he was able to play and move around the court very different to other tennis players because of his generalist sporting background. But which story and background is told more?
Exactly. So it's
Tigers,
the
right?
one of Tiger Woods. Yeah.
100%. And and this is what's so interesting. Zinhle.
Yeah.
Do
Hi,
you remember when
Jason.
we first met?
Of course I do. I had the pleasure of interviewing you on the Heavy Chef stage, and it was all things marketing. I think you blew away a lot of people because they were like, you're young, but yet you have so many insights when it comes to marketing.
Yo, that's so correct. Now look, the tables have turned. I'm interviewing you. And yes, it's not live, but I think my audience is bigger than your audience on that day. Maybe, I don't know.
Excuse us. I think we are still, well, I mean, on the day, I think we probably, it was a sold out show. So we probably had between 150 to, yeah, about 150 people in the audience. So you could be right depending on how many listeners you have on this platform.
No, it's not a competition, but you're very correct. That was the first time we met. And I really appreciate that time. And, I've been watching your journey, right? Took a very keen interest on who you are, firstly, as an individual, successful both in the corporate space and in arenas that I enjoy, like sports and wellness.
Yeah.
And, with that keen affinity, I was like, what are you about? So I did some research, along the way, seeing that you worked for Heavy Chef, seeing that you worked for Investec, and that's what I sort of pinned you as. But, the internet is a beautiful space, and I've done a bit of research. But before I, give your presidential speech of who you really are, if you'd have to walk into a room of your favorite friends and family,
Mm.
and they
Hmm.
haven't seen you for a very long time, for like almost like 10 years,
Yeah.
and they know who you are because they grew up with you, but you've now evolved, how
Hmm.
would you describe yourself to them?
I would actually say, even though I've evolved, the core essential parts of who I am have stayed the same. Like, you can ask my mom. As a kid, I was very curious, which I think came across as being rebellious. So when people would tell me not to do something, I would want to do it to challenge that the fact that, okay, if you think it's unsafe to do this, maybe there are safer ways to do it. And with that curiosity also comes like being an entrepreneur or like entrepreneurial thinking, as well as just the ability to articulate myself. My mom and even like cousins that grew up with me when I was young will tell you that, in fact, my mom has a story where I think there was a party at home and I would stand in the gate. I think I must have been 2 or 3, just giving a speech, welcoming people, and no one could understand what I was trying to say. But she can tell you that from a young age, I've always been articulate. So those stayed
Oh wow.
with me. But I think the evolution came in understanding who I am and not deviating from it. That took a while because in school you get taught like there's like, if I can say, there's a script that you follow from the time that you are in primary school to high school. So I've honestly found myself trying to challenge that script. And even when you work in corporate or different industries, there's a script in terms of what is supposed to happen. And I think my whole evolution has been about challenging that script and trying to understand what drives me, what keeps me curious, what keeps me excited about life.
And I've never told you this, but you're like one of my favorite people because the fact that you are a bit of a rebel, I lean into that side of me. So if you were like my teacher at
Yeah.
school, you would have
Yeah.
probably been I would have been one of your good students because you would have seen that side of me, and I see myself
Yeah.
also. I'm like, what? I'm a bit of a rebel, but then at the same time, you're this
Yeah.
individual who's multifaceted, right?
Mm.
We spoke about it. What's the word again? We had a little chat. Um,
Multi-potentialite.
multi-potentialite, and
Mm-hmm.
just looking at your CV, right? Bachelor in Science in Politics and Law, LLB. You also then went all the way to London to do LLM in Tech, Media, and Telecoms. And you're going to now go further your studies, right, in the
Yeah.
Netherlands. What are you going to be doing there?
That's correct. I'll be looking at the regulation of algorithmic credit scoring, mainly contrasting the developments in the EU against South Africa.
Wow. Okay, so now there's that whole academic side of you. But now there's
Yeah,
this other side of you where you
yeah.
engage in public speaking, you're mentoring, you're a how many marathons have you done?
Well, to date, I think I've only done 4 full marathons, 1 ultra, and then like I think half marathons must be around 20 or so.
Oh my goodness. Crazy, right? So now there's
Yeah.
that other side of your who you are. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
professional side, and you love your sports and fitness, and you've also part of a sort of like an NPO slash
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem called Heavy Chef.
Mm-hmm.
What other part of you don't we know that I can't find online?
What other part that of me you don't know? I mean, I also run a consultancy. So I've got my own legal consultancy, which I've had opportunities to advise banks in Switzerland. And I've got, I guess, within that company, I also assist brands. So last year I had the pleasure of working with one of Heineken's sports brand to try and promote the product. I also have done sports modeling for brands like Adidas, and you'll know because I run marathons. Last year, I was one of the campaign models for the Sanlam marathon. So I've done, yeah, and I've also done sports modeling for Intersports, which is also an international brand. Apart from that, I would say I do keynote speakings and professional emceeing. Um, I'm trying to think what else. I mean, outside of academia, I also do research in the different spaces that um, lecture in or find interesting. So I've given a couple of talks beginning of this year on research that I'm working in terms of data protection. I sometimes sit on policy papers in terms of advising the direction in terms of policy decisions that need to be made. On occasionally, I get invited either to government or parliament to give my input in terms of like recently in terms of like budget requirements for the country. So I would say I dabble in and out of different places. I also do CrossFit. So apart from the running, I'm very much into endurance training. And yeah, I think I'm also well traveled, 22 European countries to date and still growing. So yeah, really genuinely believe in following my curiosity. I've moved professionally from being in the tech space, doing data
Mhm.
protection advisory, into academia. I've worked on a project which was between the university I was in, which is Queen Mary University of London, together with Microsoft, and that was advising on cloud infrastructure, as well as creating sort of an academic platform where people can learn about cloud infrastructure.
Wow.
Oh, and then wait, what's the other thing? I mean, I
Tell
think
me
you know
more.
this. I had a podcast, but it's on pause at the moment, which was called Navigating the
Yes.
20s. And I truly believe I was in the prime area of giving that advice because I was in my late 20s. So I had seen the transition and the experience, and also I leaned on my network to also give insights. So it's currently on pause because I'm still figuring out what navigating the 30s entails. So I'm still, I mean, I just turned 30 last year. So I'm still in the early stages of understanding what 30s are about. And I think that podcast will come back. It actually grew rapidly beyond my expectations, including the newsletter that we had. I mean, within 6 months, we had about 5,000 subscribers to that newsletter. So, yeah, I think that's everything that I can think of at the moment.
Ah, and that is a lot, but I definitely know that there's more. But this is testament to exactly why I am so excited for this conversation because, you coin yourself as this multi-potentialite, right? An
Mm,
expert generalist.
yeah.
What does that actually mean for you? How does that influence your choices in life?
Mm. So, I think let me start from the beginning. I think it's a very difficult part. You need to be rebellious, and you also need to be sure that this is who you are. I never grew up with the intention to become a multi-potentialite. I just kind of saw that that's where my life was going. So it started with high school when we had to select sports. I remember selecting basketball, netball, hockey, and doing athletics, and then still doing the cultural stuff like acting, which was drama then, I think, and public speaking and debating. And then my teachers would
Mm,
sit me down and be like, "You're doing too many things and you're spreading yourself thin," which became like a broken record throughout my life. And I would actually lo and behold, take their advice and reduce the amount of sports activities so I could focus on academia, and I would then do miserably well. So I then started to realize I'm energized by the playing field of doing many things because it requires me to think differently. It also means I don't get bored because I am almost stretched to think in different compartments. How this changed in corporate, or when I started working, was that in corporate, you do get institutions that will allow you the flexibility to be part of the media team and do a bit of PR and do everything. But then I started to realize I'm still doing, let's say I'm working for a law firm. So even if they do allow me to do a bit of PR, do a bit of creative writing, and actually give legal advice, it's all in law. I don't get to stretch outside of law. And that's when I realized that it's not just about doing law. I needed space to think entrepreneurially. I needed space to be in entrepreneurial ecosystems to solve for those problems, because if I'm only in law, I'm thinking in a specific way. I'm not really stretching outside of the norms of how a lawyer should think. Now, when you have that
mm,
interplay, I think it really clicks in when you've got problems to solve. And when you are in teams where you have to collaborate with people, you start to see the difference. People that are only trained in law think in a rigid manner within the law, and they cannot expand beyond that reality, versus when you bring in somebody who says, I've got experiences as an entrepreneur. I've got an experience working with ecosystems. I've got an experience working with policy. They literally can solve in any realm. And so I think that's been my core strength from being a multi-potentializer, that you can throw me in any room. I never feel intimidated because I feel that my skills of expertise and experience expand beyond law. Yeah, and I think now in academia as well, it's allowing me that opportunity. I've got the flexibility to explore different research areas that aren't necessarily always linked to law. To give an example, I am now working on a paper with a platform called Grit, who are solving for gender-based violence using AI and tech. And so that question then forces me to think about GBV in a policy form, in a tech form, and also what it means for South African country. So that helps solve problems that are very big, and it's meaningful work. So I
Mm.
think if I had only stuck to being a tax lawyer or being a data privacy lawyer, I'd be very confined.
So you make a mention that, you said you backtracked and sort of said in primary school the
Mm,
system limited you.
hmm.
But you grew up in 7 different cities, 5 different
That's true.
provinces.
Yeah.
Do you think your upbringing had a effect or some type of, let's say, nudge to the way you view the world?
Oh my goodness. This is when you know your researcher did their homework. It's an excellent question to ask because that's not on social media, but I think I might have told you this in conversation. I think you hit the nail on the head. My upbringing had everything to do with it. That movement and the fact that I was raised in a multilingual family. So we spoke 4 to 5 different languages, and also my nannies were from Lesotho, so I was never in any regard just with South Africans or just with Xhosa or Zulu people. My life was truly heterogeneous or heterogeneous, and
Mhm.
what then happened is I started to learn to adapt, because you can imagine having been to 5 primary schools, um, 2 high schools, 4 universities, and just the schooling part of it was spread across the 7 different cities across 5 different provinces. What that meant was that I learned to adapt very quickly. I had to re-strategize. How do you make friends in a different part of the country where the language is different, where the school curricula is slightly different from the previous one? So from that, I learned to adapt quickly and use different sets of skills to be like, okay, I've got the adaptability in language, but also how do you make friends in a new place? It means you have to then take part in sports, because then it's easier. But then maybe in some schools, the dominant sports is basketball, and the other school, it might be netball or hockey. So with that, with becoming a multi-potentialite, was the ability to adapt, which I then found in my adult form, that it doesn't matter which country you throw me in, give me a couple of days, I can find my people, establish genuine communities. I think for some people, it's so terrifying to stay in one place. It's terrifying for them to move all the time, as I did as a child. But for me, that's the norm. It's terrifying to stay in one place for 20 years, because I then feel like, what if you outgrow the space? What if you no longer give value? Which I think also sort of became my personal life mantra, in the sense that if I'm in a space and I see that I can no longer give value to that space, I don't feel a compulsion to stay. So I'm not fixated or or tied to a specific place, if that makes sense. I'm there because I
Mm.
believe in this time and in this space I'm going to add value. And the minute that I can't, I will leave. And I think that's also a difficult conversation for most people to have. Some people feel like, okay, because I've been in this place for 5 years, I need to stay until I reach the 20 mark and get the 20-year certificate, or whatever the case is. I think change becomes very difficult for many people to embrace. But if you're a multi-potentialite, most likely you are confronted by change all the time, changing your way of thinking, relearning new knowledge, learning to apply that knowledge in different contexts. That's basically the name of the game for any multi-potentialite.
You know, multi-potentialite and specialization and focus. The world leans on this word focus,
Yeah,
10,000
yeah,
hours.
yeah.
Um, double
My,
down, find your niche. You know,
yeah.
it's such a great story because I'm
Yeah.
reading a book which I actually
Mm.
cheekily asked you to read, but I don't know
Ooh.
if you did. It's a Range, right?
Yes.
By David Epstein, where it's speaking about how in a world of hyper specialization,
Mm.
the generalist wins. And it's got the
Exactly.
sports analogy where Tiger Woods was and still is glorified because from
Yeah.
young age his father you know primed him to be a golfer. At 2 years old, this guy
Mm-hmm.
was hitting a golf ball, and one of the best golfing and I would say sportsmen in history. But then
Yeah.
there's this Roger Federer story, right,
Mm-hmm.
where he actually was a generalist, played amazing football, played handball, did all these
Mm-hmm.
other sports, and
Mm.
if I'm not mistaken, peaked later than usual as a tennis player.
Absolutely.
And the reasons they say is he was able to play and move around the court very different to other tennis players because of his generalist sporting background.
Mm-hmm.
But which story and background is told more?
Exactly. So it's
Tigers,
the
right?
one of Tiger Woods. Yeah.
100%. And and this is what's so interesting where you now probably need to make a movie around multi-potentialites so that people like us can
Yeah.
also feel at home the way you do, like feel empowered, feel confident to know that you can move in the world different and not have to feel ashamed that I'm over this. Like I
Yeah.
technically, and over it isn't the wrong word. I've changed and I've
Mm-hmm.
added as much value as I can, and I'm now ready
Mm.
to go and continue adding value. So I love the way you
Absolutely.
express that, and I think, like I said, you're one of my favorite people because
Mm.
I gain so much confidence from you and the way you move in the world.
Thank
You
you,
know,
Jason. And I'm so glad you used those two examples because I think there's a bit of hypocrisy in the world. And I'll give you two direct examples, right? When you're a parent, you almost have to operate as a multi-potentialite. Like your child is sick, you need to figure out what medicine to give them. If your child is having psychological issues, you become the psychologist. When your child is hungry, you are the chef. When the child doesn't know how to do maths, you become the teacher. You perform all those roles, but no one says, hey, stick to parenting. Like if you want to parent your child, like you should only do parenting, leave the medication to the doctors. I mean, there is exceptions to that, but parenting requires you to put on all hats 24/7, and no one speaks about that. And it's similarly like what I would say is that it's almost felt like my whole life I was a marathon runner only to find out that I was a triathlete. So the whole world goes, you can't be a triathlete. Why not focus on one discipline? Yet no one's criticizing the triathletes and saying, well, you're spreading yourself too thin. You think you can bike, swim, and run, especially the people that are doing full Ironman. There's no ways. Yet we have a category for that. So I think if the world were to be genuine, I think there might be like multi-potentialite exists on a spectrum, and I might be on the extreme end, but I'd like to believe that every person to their core is a multi-potentialite. Even if you're not a parent, you fulfill different roles with the relationships that you have. So you are a friend, you're a brother, you are a son, you are a colleague. You are technically working in a multi-potentialite. You can't be advising your brother as though you're advising a colleague. So in our personal lives, we are encouraged to be multi-potentialites, yet when we get to work, then it's a different story. And also we allow certain people the grace to become multi-potentialized. So the fact that Bill Gates now can go from philanthropy to doing R&D just because he's proven to the world, like, yeah, I was successful and did my 10,000 hours with Microsoft. Now I can expand and do everything. But why do we have to wait until we build a Microsoft if we genuinely want to live life where we go, okay, actually, I'm interested in philanthropy and I want to do R&D and solve for malaria. So for me, the world has some level of hypocrisy with that. And I've had to almost, like I would say, I first gave into that rhetoric, like, oh, focus on the 10,000 hours, focus on one thing. But it literally dimmed me. And even for entrepreneurs, like if you only had to focus on one aspect of your business, because if my lo and behold, if my business is just providing legal services and I'm just going to narrow in on giving legal advice, what about the marketing? Where am I going to meet my clients? What about product development? How do I solve for efficiency? So we really need to be honest about this idea that you should zero in on one thing. Because I don't know how many people have tried it and then go, actually, it's impossible. Why must I neglect all the other areas? Even with health and wealth, we look at spiritual wellness, we look at your mental health, your physical health, we look at, we look at you holistically, yet the world is still saying 10,000 hours, one thing at a time.
So well said. And do you know Esther Perel?
Of course. Oh, I love Esther Perel.
So Esther Perel, and why I'm sort of like inside giggling with you.
Yeah.
Stephen Bartlett had Esther on, and there's this moment where Esther's shouting, but she's just
Yeah.
expressing herself. Like, I'm like, yo, Zinhle, why are you shouting? Why?
Sorry.
Why? I'm like, whoa.
Sorry, I'm taking out
Like,
my anger on the hypocrisy of the world on Jason.
no. Like, I'm just like, yo. Like the expression just changed, but I definitely resonate with that, and the way you've shared it with this very real picture of parenting. Like,
Mm,
it's very hard to not be able to, not even if you're a parent, to empathize. I can't
mm,
relate. I don't have kids,
mm,
but I can empathize 100% with a mom
mm.
holding the little baby here while the other
Yeah,
boy is here and shouting at the husband or telling husband, baby, I love you. You know,
exactly.
you know. And there's two other things that she's trying to give love to.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
unbelievable. But this hypocrisy,
Mm,
I'm sure, must have challenged you in many different spaces because they must ha- be skeptical about you, right?
yeah.
People must have been
Yeah.
like skeptics. How do you approach those conversations, and how do you address the
Yeah.
acute hypocrisy and skepticism? How do you go about doing that?
Okay, so I'll give you examples of what would happen. So if I would go for a job interview, somebody would be like, "My goodness, you've been everywhere. Like, how do we know you will stay in our organization because you went from this one to this one?" And then they also can't tie the thread because the roles are so different. So I remember, I think it was like 2 years ago, I was interviewing for a position, and I honestly said to the guy, "You don't know that I'll stay forever. I will stay for as long as I can add value to the organization because." For one thing about me, I'm not going to beat around the bush. And so that's what I said. And then he even said, like, "Oh, but now you're not an expert in any area or any field. So, like, which department are we going to put you in?" And that's also a struggle to be able to articulate that. And I think um, the issue is also in terms of how certain organizations are set. And I think in the end, that's why I found that working in corporate was not for me, that I would rather be a consultant or an advisory to corporate, because the way it's structured, you need to silo in people. So me trying to explain to a person that this is my resume, but I don't necessarily fit into a specific department, is very hard to do, especially with that bureaucracy. I think you can get away with it in small startups, but the minute the startup gets bigger, then that changes. Like, some people tell you like Capitec was a really cool place to work when it was a startup. And then obviously as it grows, then certain measures need to be put in place. You get the experience of
Mm,
more bureaucracy. So my first thing is stay true to yourself. Because for a lot of times, or a large part of my career, I tried to bend to the rhetoric, like become a specialist in one area. And I found that I couldn't perform at my peak because of that. And I think a lot of multi-potentialites are going to gravitate towards consulting or perhaps even starting their own business. The other half could potentially also be in academia. And I think academia gives you that flexibility. The biggest thing that for me was a solution was like, how can I free up more time to do the things that energize me. And I think if your job or your occupation doesn't give you that ability, then you can't explore the other things. So then the first thing you'd need to solve for is, how can I free up more time? And then once you free up more time, follow your curiosity. Don't be afraid of things failing. There's many things that I've tried and then realized, okay, this is not for me. I can't do this. And there's no shame in that. I think people also think that when you get to 30 and above, like, you need to be defined and you can't be at beginner. So I think always adopt the beginner mindset. I'm always up for a challenge. People will call me and say, hey, we're working on this project. Do you think you can do it? And at first I'm scared. And you've got to see the risk. Like, can I learn to do what the people expect me to do? But don't turn down opportunities just because you feel like at this age you should have things together. You'll never have things together. And this is where Michelle Obama comes in. When I started reading her memoir, and there's a quote that she says there where she says, like, we ask people, like, what do you want to be when you grow up, as if growing up is an infinite process. The truth is, we'll never stop growing up.
Stop
So
growing.
even if 10 years ago I said I wanted to be a lawyer, there's no reason why in this day and age that answer can't change. And it can't, and it's also the same thing. I think, don't allow people to contain you or box you to say, okay, now you're an entrepreneur, which means you're going to be an entrepreneur for the next 15 years. Maybe business fails and I go back to corporate, the same corporate that I said I'd never go back to. That is okay. You're allowed to change your mind because you're infinitely growing. You're collecting data about yourself and the experiences, and in that it accumulates to make you the person that you are.
My ears started to tickle when you were like, generalists should maybe go and start a business. And I know that
Mm-hmm.
you've been involved in different businesses. And one of them, what was really cool was cool.
Yeah.
One would excuse my cool shacks. One of them, what was cool, was called Cool Shacks Project, right?
That's
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
and how did that go? Like, just
Oh
for
my
anybody
goodness.
listening, like, tell me about this. Go from the genesis. Like, did
Yeah.
someone pull you in? Did you
Yeah.
just come up with the idea? And just give from the genesis, like cool shack projects. Like what?
You really did your research. You digged deep. So what a lot of people won't know is, when in second year at UCT, I registered my first business with three of my co-founders, and that was one of the babies of that business was Cool Shacks. And by the time I graduated, I had two businesses registered, but both did not succeed. But to answer your question with Cool Shacks, so um, when I was in law school, my first or second year of law school, I just felt like I didn't fit in with the lawyers. I was hanging around with the engineers, the accounting students. And so three of my friends, one was an engineer, is now a software developer for Google. The other one is an entrepreneur, he's from Namibia. And the other studied accounting. I think he's also now an entrepreneur. We came together and we're like, guys, we need to start a business. And Andre, who's the Namibian entrepreneur, was um, in the EGS department. So at the time, they were doing studies in Imizamo Yetu in Hout Bay, trying to figure out, like, what are the issues with shack fires and so on. So they had that raw data and trying to figure out, like, why are people staying in shacks even though the government is providing housing. So we got together as business partners together with Professor Kevin Winter, and we actually outsourced a guy who was developing a material that he didn't know what to do with it. So this material is made from recycled plastic bottles, and it had like fire retardant properties. So basically, instead of the material burning, it would slowly melt. And so together we formulated this idea that perhaps we could go retrofit shacks using those materials. And slowly we started to play with a demo shack to be like, okay, how can we make a shack slightly better or more efficient? So things like looking at enhancing lighting, creating better drainage, but the material was a game changer. So what would happen is, without the material, when a fire breaks out in a shack, it would combust. And because of how Mizamo yetu is set up, by the time the fire brigade would get there, everything would be gone, and the chances are that shack fire would spread within minutes. But what that material would do is it would buy a person between 10 to 15 minutes to collect their items out of the shack and try and actually contain the fire. So I ended up having to do a TED talk on this, but the TED talk ended up getting put down because TED talk with they're not getting involved in politics. I mean, the big issue here that we faced, which was a resistance, was that we are condoning the fact that people are living in shacks. And our studies showed then that even though the government is providing formal housing, people basically move out of the formal housing back into the shack, and then they rent out the formal housing that the government supplies so that they can make an income. So even if we're saying yes, formal housing is coming, it's just not solving the issue. So we were saying let's solve for the now, because the shack fires aren't going away. Sadly, so after doing like I don't know how many pitch competitions, I was missing class to go pitch for funding. Then in the end, we decided, you know what, it's not working out, because it could only also be profitable if the government was willing to partner with us, and they were not, for that reason that they'd be seen to be promoting shacks. So we ended up donating the demo shack to the MTN Science Solution. And unfortunately, my business partners and I also split, and I went on to the second venture, which was slightly different. So I think it was very interesting that yeah, even though I was a law student, spending time in different faculties, so literally sitting in, and I would advise any student to do this, they don't kick you out. Like, go sit in the engineering department, go learn what the engineers are learning. Even if you're not going to have an engineering business idea, at the best, you'll learn how to communicate with engineers, especially if you're looking to build a business, or even if you are an entrepreneur within an organization. I think it helps to communicate outside of whatever specialty you're in.
Wow, that's a cool project, even though it's for shacks. That's a cool project, even though it's for shacks.
Oh, also
Um,
the reason why it was called Cool Shacks in the end was because, well, the main premise, apart from it, from the material being fire retardant, it was that we found that shacks on a hot day increase in temperature by about 11 degrees. So with
mhm.
the material that we used to retrofit around the shack, you could reduce those temperatures, cooling the shack dramatically down. So it became a cool shack.
Oh my goodness. We have to bring this back. We have to bring it back. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Wow, Zinhle, that is amazing. Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you. I
Oh,
mean, it was a nice effort. Like, what happens when an engineer, somebody who studies the environment, an accountant, and a lawyer come into one room, and that's I guess the beauty of the project as well.
I have to talk to you about this project after this. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you choose an initiative like that you pursue? Because I want to do running. I want to become a I'm actually, going into high rocks, and
Are you
surprisingly I'm
taking part in the competition this in the
yeah,
coming 2 weeks?
yes.
Oh
Yes, yeah, next week.
wow! Oh wow! That's
Yeah, yeah.
amazing. Good
So
luck.
like surprisingly, I'm pretty good at it, and it's like I'm clocking some interesting numbers. And
Mm,
now, like, my both ego and competition, and just this other side of me, like, wait, maybe this is something I take on. I want to get to elite level. Time,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Podcast. Oh,
Yeah.
it's picking up. I'm getting really cool guests. Like, okay, maybe I want to get it to this level. Time.
Yeah.
How do you choose the initiatives that you need to pursue? How do you balance it all?
Okay, fair point. I still don't have a good remedy for this, but what I try, I would say every month I pick 5 projects for that month. But what I learned is at any point in time, you can only juggle 3 efficiently without completely dropping the ball. So, what I will say is like, these are my 5 projects. And then on a weekly basis, I juggle the 3. And at the end of the month, all 5 must be done. So like for instance, now I'm working on a research paper. I'm refining my proposal for my PhD. Let's say I'm doing my actual job, so being a lecturer, and then I am consulting and advising for a construction client. So that was project 4, and then it's my fitness. So that is, I'm supposed to be doing marathon training. So those are those 5. So I juggle between these 5. Notice there's no relationship, because that would be number 6. So if I say, okay,
Okay.
somebody's birthday coming up, and so it requires me to show up on the weekend, one of these balls have to fall. So each time you bring in something, you have to replace something. So firstly, follow that. I struggle with saying no, and I think this is a problem with everyone. Or you get excited about a project and you underestimate how much time you have, and that can result in overwhelm. So I'm always going from excited, overwhelmed, excited, overwhelmed. But I've noticed that this 5-3 theory works for me well. So I just, like, for this month, January or July, we're committing to these 5 projects. Every week we're balancing 3, and at the end of the month, all 5 will be completed. So that's one technique of saying it. Follow your curiosity. And also, if you want to know whether it can work out, you can only know once you're in it. And I think this is the other part that I learned. Like, if you're in it and you realize it's not working out, let it go. Like, if you're like, okay, it actually doesn't work for my life. Like, if being a high rocks athlete means I need to dedicate 4 hours and I'm already tired and then I can't think and my business is collapsing because of that, then it's just not a good fit. But if it fits perfectly, then it's fine. But just know, for instance, if we go with your high rocks example, if you're going to add high rocks on the plate, the big question is what's going to fall off the plate that you're willing to compromise that time for. And sadly for me, it's been relationships, because I think my friends understand and my family understand that this is the life that I've chosen. When I do show up, I show up in full force, but then it means 80% of the time I'm not there.
Hey, yeah, and that's, I think, a key to your ability to articulate yourself, right? Um, it's a beautiful skill that you have, I must commend, and that's something
Thank you.
that you wear with pride. And I think all we have in life is compassion and communication, right? That's
Hmm.
all we have to connect us, right? All these other things, of course, yes, like the spirituality and things, but like really what you can control is your compassion towards those people you care, and the
Mm-hmm.
ability to communicate how you feel, what you like, what you don't like. That's what's
Yeah.
going to connect us, not some third
Mm.
space where there's nice coffee, not the
Mm-mm.
not so the fact that you can articulate yourself is beautiful. Like it's
Thank
another
you.
thing. Let me add that to my shrine that I have of my favorite person, Zinhle.
But can I tell you, you say that now, and it's really funny when I think back. When I before I started public speaking, I was often teased for the way that I speak and the way I enunciate words, which is very ironic now. I think what happened was my transition from, let's say, being in a public school and going to a private school and not having a private school accent. Um, I often got teased for that, and yeah. So I think if I had let that put me down, I probably wouldn't be speaking, and I had to actually find my own unique voice and say it's fine. I don't say house, I say house, and that's okay. I enunciate all the vowels in words, and that's okay. And that's like a genuine concern, because I mean, even though I don't speak in that way, the fact that I enunciate words in a particular way has afforded me certain privileges that people can and are comfortable enough to say, we want you to give a keynote because you don't speak with an African accent. And so it gives us the idea that you know more. And these are just the biases that are in the world for anyone who is coming, wants to come into the MCing. People still, use your accent to determine credibility. So if I was speaking with a completely different accent, it's harder to get people to believe that I'm an expert in that area. And that's not to say that I still don't face certain biases being a Black woman, especially trying to speak about tech. what often happens, which now I've stopped doing, is like you have to prove to people, be like, yes, I'm an admitted attorney and I studied in London, and you have to give all those credentials to say that I have reason to be, and everything that I'm saying is well researched and it's meaningful. Which certain people don't have to go through, right? They just open their mouth and everyone believes whatever they say without them having to state what their credibility or credentials are.
There's few guests that I normally invite back. I'm going to invite you back for that topic. Like
Yeah,
like
that's a
let's not
topic
get
on its
too
own.
deep into, but that is a topic on its own. Voice,
Yeah.
like there's that phenomena. Like I think outside of the US, no, inside of the US, I think it's over 40 or 50% of CEOs are over 6'2". Just because,
Mm-hmm.
not because they're
Mm.
and then there's looks, and then how you sound. I would love to
Yes.
like dive into your world, because the fact
Yeah.
that you've touched, big corporate, ran your own business, been
Mm-hmm.
on stage, you would have experienced, because I believe you're quite a present individual, a, a lot of those phenomena, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
some of us, like myself, are not that well attuned to. But now, of course, I think
Mm.
as I've ran my own business, I've been a bit
Mm.
more like learned to take that pause and just be like, okay, where am
Mm.
I now? Okay, you're here, you've made it,
Yeah.
but who's around me? Like, let's acknowledge
Exactly.
them. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it colors in a lot of things in life. And you touched on a very, very important point, and you're coming back on. You're definitely coming
Can I
back on.
ask you a question?
Please let me. Please do
How
ask a
have
question.
you found the transition? Because I mean, I think you also, it's like our lives almost mirror each other in the sense that you went and studied abroad, you did your own thing, you came back, you started a business. Um, would you categorize yourself as a multi-potentialite as well? And if so, how do you think it's enabled you to dabble in different spaces?
So I would have. So multi-potentialite is a new word to me, and the way you've described it, yes, I would say I am.
Mm,
Given my background, also, I think a lot of it has come from being fortunate enough to have a diverse family. Like I've got
mm,
four sisters, you
mm-hmm,
know, and then I was fortunate enough to live overseas while I was young. Came back to South Africa for high school, went back overseas,
mm,
traveled. A lot of that experience forced me to understand how to navigate the world alone,
mm,
right?
mm.
And that's where, even if it was good or bad, it just forced me to adapt.
Yeah.
It forced me to, a lot of people, the simple thing is to live life. You have a choice. I had to live in some way. And then
Mm,
I guess just because of the individual I am, I do enjoy social interactions. I do enjoy sports. So social
mm-hmm.
interaction in Spain is very different to Canada. So I had
Yeah.
to adapt.
Mm,
um so it's helped me tremendously, right? And I think this
mhm,
book, and I think it's over, probably this last 2-3 years, I've figured out that I need to understand my skill stack, right?
mm,
Like my
mm,
skill stack that's going to keep me advantageous in all the
mm.
things I pursue. And it's
Sure.
not what the teacher taught me, where you need to be this, you need to be that.
Yeah.
Sometimes your skill stack is so different that
Mm.
when you're in the room, you're actually the most quiet. Like, you need to talk up, you need to make yourself heard. The fact
No.
that I found out that I am someone of little words, they always say, like, wow, you're a man of little words. But
Yeah.
the words I tend to say resonate, because after in an
Mm,
email, someone's quoting me in the follow-up
mm,
email, stuff
mm.
like that. So I think that's what's helped me along my journey of moving, starting businesses, is
Yeah.
just the exposure to a lot of things have forced me to build an interesting skill set. And now I'm in
Mm-hmm.
this journey of understanding what my skills stack is, so that I
Yeah.
can at times lean into, you said, sometimes I'm scared. You said sometimes, let's say a project is presented to you, you feel scared. That's the
Yeah.
moment to pause and say, what in my skill stack is going to
Mm-hmm.
turn this fear into opportunity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at with this. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Sure. No, that's a great answer. I'm taking notes, by the way.
No, but yeah, just continuing, Zinhle. Let's
Mm.
we've segued from who you are. You've traveled. You've studied. You've started and closed very cool businesses, and
Mm-hmm.
you've also been quite an advocate for different things,
Yeah.
and you've got a very social impact lens on. Whenever I
Mm.
see you, whenever I read a little bit about you, there was this incident in, I think it was 2002 or 3, when you were doing your traveling, and I didn't know about this because, like, I've traveled on Ryanair many times, but there's
Yeah.
this discriminatory practice that Ryanair took Afrikaans tests.
Yeah. Yeah.
For what? Like, what? Tell me the story. What?
Can I
Why?
tell you, I was coming from a holiday from Ibiza. I had the time of my life. I was on the beaches, not in the clubs, in case you're wondering. And so I get to the airport in Ibiza, and I need to fly to London because I was based in London at the time. And then I get told that there's a high influx of fake South African passports, and because of that, in order to board the plane, I need to prove that I am South African by passing a test that asks general questions that each South African knows, but the questions are in Afrikaans and the answer has to be in Afrikaans. And only if you pass the test, you can board the plane. Otherwise, you can't board. So I'm like, well, first of all, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna answer this. Like, thankfully, I did do Afrikaans, so I wrote the test. There were typos. Like, imagine me, Afrikaans is not even on my scale of languages. I would say maybe if it is a language, it'd be like sixth language. So I could pick up the typos. And it was questions such as like, so this is the one I got wrong. Like, what's the highest mountain in South Africa? I think I wrote the Maluti, which is not. There's another peak that's higher than the Maluti in the Drakensberg. It was things like, where do South Africans drive, on the left or right side of the road? Then you had to name all the colors of the South African flag in Afrikaans, obviously. And I managed to pass the test. I took a picture. So I took a picture, I tweeted it on Twitter, I put it on Instagram. I got in touch with one friend who knew a couple of journalists. So before I knew it, it like spread like wildfire. We had Sky News, BBC, couple of American journalists also wanted an intake. SABC reported on it. At the same time, when I posted it on my Instagram, a couple of people reached out to Durco. So they gave me the relevant emails to place a complaint. And it turned out that South Africa was never notified that this was going to be a practice. Similarly, the UK knew nothing about it. In the end, Ryanair took down the test, but lo and behold, ex-South Africans were the ones that suggested that that would be an appropriate test for South Africans to fill in to prove that they're South African. So I felt at the time like, you can imagine, number one, my mom didn't know I was in Ibiza. So I had to call her and say, listen, the story is about to go viral. This is what's happening. Informed a couple of friends. And I had, I think, 3 flights left with Ryanair. I was supposed to go to Italy the following week. I had to cancel them because I was technically in protest week. So I could not be a hypocrite and say, we should not fly Ryanair and boycott it and then like go to Italy. So I had to cancel my Italy trips. And we called out Ryanair. I think it took like 2 weeks because the story just spread like wildfire. And for me, it was important to stand up in that moment because I was like, imagine had I not done Afrikaans. And the reality is, even though Afrikaans is a South African language, the percentage of South Africans that speak that language are very few. If they had said, you can choose this in all 11 official languages, then by all means. But also, it was a question of why those particular questions would determine whether somebody's South African or not. But what it really goes down to is that if you ask somebody who is black, given our June 16, uh, if you give, why am I losing my words? But basically, given our background of June 16, to ask a black South African to fill in a questionnaire in Afrikaans is tantamount to indirect discrimination, because our parents fought against the system. So yeah, it was very important for me to have that voice. And funny enough, I mean, I had people who were concerned about my reputation and everything, and they said, "You don't want to be known as that girl. Like, you're gonna go fight against Ryanair. Do you want to be labeled as?" Because obviously, there's perceptions for people that fight against discrimination against corporates. So I said, you know what? Even if it taints my reputation, I'm standing up for something that I believe in. So whichever
Mm.
organization doesn't want to hire me for that, I don't even want to work for them. So it's, yeah.
Sure. No, big ups to you. Big ups to you, Zinhle. It's daunting, but I
Yeah.
think when you came over the mountain, you must have felt some sort of internal pride, but it's bigger than you. It's way bigger than you.
No,
So if you
absolutely.
didn't do that, yeah, I mean, that would have just gone by the wayside.
No,
So,
definitely. And I also think there's a responsibility. Like, once you garner, um, because I've worked on my brand so specifically that once you have a platform, that you should use it to hold space for other people that wouldn't be in the same positions. Which is why if I get invited in rooms that I know, like, some South Africans would like to be in, I always then give feedback